You won't believe what happened when the police finally broke through that basement wall and came face to face with something so unspeakable, so utterly monstrous, that seasoned officers wept in the parking lot afterward. Tonight we're going deep into 3 of the most disturbing, most real horror stories ever shared online. Turn the lights on, lock your doors, and whatever you do, don't listen too closely to the sounds coming from the other side of your walls. Story 1. The Wall. I want you to picture something for me. You're in your house, you feel safe, you feel home. And somewhere, just on the other side of a thin partition of brick and plaster, your neighbor is awake. You can hear him, little sounds, scraping, tapping, the low mechanical hum of something you can't quite name. You tell yourself it's nothing. She told herself the same thing. Her name doesn't matter. What matters is that she was a woman living alone in a row house, in the kind of neighborhood where houses press against each other like teeth in a crowded jaw. Row houses, if you've never lived in one, share walls. Not just exterior walls, basement walls. Thin, brittle walls. Walls made from brick that, in some of the older buildings, crumble if you press too hard with your thumb. Her neighbor was a man. Odd. Unsettling in the specific way that makes you feel guilty for thinking so, because he hadn't done anything, not technically, not yet. He kept strange hours. She'd hear him at 2, 3, 4 in the morning. Sounds drifting through the plaster. Dragging sounds. The occasional mechanical whir of something she never investigated because she was tired and it was probably nothing. He watched her. Not in a way she could ever report. Not in a way a police officer would take seriously. It was the way he'd appear in his doorway the exact moment she stepped outside. The way his eyes would track her down the steps to her car, that flat, patient stare that never broke, never softened, never became anything human. The way he'd pound on the shared wall sometimes, in the middle of the night, for no reason. 3 slow knocks, then nothing for an hour. Then 3 more. She complained to her building manager. She mentioned it to friends. They all said the same thing. Document it, but there's nothing you can do about being a weird neighbor. So she locked her door a little more carefully. She kept her curtains closed. She told herself she was being dramatic. Then she stopped coming to work. 1 day, 2 days. Her desk sat empty. Her phone went to voicemail. Her colleagues, at first, assumed she was sick. By the 3rd day, her supervisor called the police and requested a wellness check, the kind of routine house call that cops do dozens of times a month and almost never find anything alarming. The officers knocked on her front door. No answer. They let themselves in the way they're permitted to do in a wellness check. The house was empty, not ransacked, not disturbed, just empty. Her jacket on the hook, her coffee cup on the counter, her television remote sitting on the arm of the couch like she'd just stepped out for a moment and would be back any second. They searched the house, room to room, closets, bathroom, upstairs. And then one of the officers stopped at the top of the basement stairs. He could hear something. Low, mechanical. A sound that took him a moment to identify because he had no reason to expect it in a residential basement, in the middle of the afternoon, in a row house on a quiet street. An electric table saw. They went down. And at the back of her basement, behind the furnace, behind the water heater, behind everything that normal people store in a basement, they found the wall, or rather, they found where the wall used to be. A section of brick had been removed. Not recently. This had taken time, patience, planning, the work of many nights, chipping away quietly in the dark while she slept above him, believing that sound was just the oddness of shared living. An officer pressed his face to the gap. I am not going to describe in full what he saw. I am going to tell you only what the police report confirmed, because some things, once heard, cannot be unheard. The man was in his basement. He was covered in blood. The table saw was running. On the workbench in front of him was what remained of the woman who had lived next door. They arrested him without resistance. He said nothing. He simply let them handcuff him and walk him out through his front door, past the stoop where he had stood so many nights watching her, and into the back of a police transport wagon. The drive to the station took 11 minutes. When they opened the wagon door, he was dead. He had removed his belt in those 11 minutes of silence and hanged himself from the interior rail of the vehicle, efficiently, without a sound. I still wonder, what do you think she heard in those final nights through that wall? And do you think any part of her knew? But the nightmare was only beginning in the endless dark. Story 2. The Talisman. Some things find you. That's the part that gets under my skin when I think back on all of it. We think we choose our experiences. We think danger is something we walk toward, something we invite. But sometimes something reaches out from wherever it lives, and it chooses you. 6 of us had planned the camping trip for weeks. Me, my boyfriend, and 4 friends. Mia, Charm, Carlos, and Ryder. Nothing fancy. Just the mountains, a campfire, and a few nights away from the noise of everything. We'd done trips like this before. We weren't naive about the outdoors. 5 days before we were supposed to leave, I stopped at a convenience store. Nothing remarkable. I was just grabbing drinks, parked in the lot, minding my own business. That's when she approached me. The woman wasn't frightening to look at. She wasn't disheveled or wild-eyed the way people in stories like this usually are. She was just a woman, ordinary-looking, but she wouldn't meet my gaze. Her eyes were slightly downcast, like someone embarrassed about what they were doing, but doing it anyway because they had to. She didn't say much. She pressed something into my palm, a bracelet, a simple red string bracelet, and then she walked away quickly, and I remember watching her go and feeling strange. Not scared, just strange. The bracelet was warm, not warm the way something is warm after being held in a person's hand. I know what that feels like. This was different. The warmth was interior, like something inside the string was generating heat on its own, like a small, slow pulse. I thought, okay, that's weird. And then, because I am exactly the kind of person who drops things into their bag and forgets about them, I dropped it into my purse and didn't think about it again. We got to the campsite around 4 in the afternoon. We weren't alone. There was a couple set up maybe 100 yards away, but we'd chosen a spot far enough from them that it felt private. The early hours were fine. We set up the tents, took pictures while the light was still golden, laughed too loud, ate well. Normal, easy, safe. But Mia said something before sunset that I filed away and didn't take seriously until much later. She said she felt uneasy in this specific part of the woods. Mia is, how do I explain Mia? She is more sensitive than other people. Not in a dramatic way she performs, in a quiet way that occasionally makes the back of your neck prickle, because her discomfort tends to show up before any rational explanation presents itself. We teased her gently. She didn't push it. At some point, standing near the campfire, I opened my purse for something and my hand closed around the bracelet. It was warmer than before. By 7 o'clock, we were finishing dinner around the fire, and then the forest went quiet. If you have spent time in the Appalachians, if you have read about them or listened to people who know them, you understand what that silence means. The mountains are never truly quiet. There are always insects, birds, the small shuffling of animals in the underbrush. When that stops, when everything simply ceases, it means something in that ecosystem has decided to hold very, very still. We were sitting in our usual arrangement. My boyfriend and I together, Carlos and Charm to our left, Ryder and Mia across the fire from us, and Mia went rigid. Not gradually, instantly, like a switch had been thrown somewhere inside her. She looked at me. She said very quietly, "Don't turn around." She said she could see something behind me and my boyfriend. She said it was smiling. I want to be careful here about how I describe what came next, because I did not see what Mia saw. But I watched her face as she looked at whatever was behind me, and I watched it change in a way that I cannot fully articulate. The color left it. Her eyes went very wide and very still, and then her hands began to shake. My boyfriend started turning around, not because he wanted to, because his body kept doing it without his permission. That panicked, helpless swivel of someone who cannot stop checking the dark behind them, no matter how much they know they shouldn't. Then it spread. Ryder said he could hear footsteps, not one pair, multiple, circling us slowly, just outside the reach of the firelight, deliberate and patient. Charm stood up suddenly and told us, in a voice I will never forget, that something was sitting inside her tent. She had seen it through the nylon. Something inside, just sitting there. Carlos pulled up his sleeve. There were scratches on his arm, fresh ones. He hadn't been near anything that could have made them, and he said he'd felt something dragging across his skin from the outside. My boyfriend turned to me and asked if it was talking to me too. I stared at him. I didn't know what to say. I hadn't heard anything. I hadn't seen anything. But everyone around me was dissolving. Charm and Mia both crying. Ryder pacing and shouting at the dark. Carlos breathing in short, sharp gasps. And my boyfriend, who is one of the most level-headed people I have ever known, was asking me if it was talking to me. I didn't ask him what it had said to him. I am honestly not sure I want to know. I grabbed my purse. The bracelet inside it was burning hot. We didn't pack. We didn't think about it. Me and my boyfriend were the only ones capable of driving, and we made a decision in about 30 seconds. Everyone into the cars, drive home, come back for the gear in daylight. We dragged our friends bodily off that campsite, and I remember looking back as we pulled onto the road and seeing the firelight shrinking behind us and feeling, very distinctly, the sensation of something watching us leave. The drive home was 1 hour. I had Charm, Mia, and Ryder in my car. The girls cried almost the entire way. Ryder sat in the back and didn't speak. I focused on the road and kept both hands on the wheel and did not look in my rearview mirror more than I had to. The next morning, I upended my purse onto the kitchen table. The bracelet was there, but it didn't look the same. The red string was darkened, scorched in places, as if it had been held too close to a flame, as if something had burned through it from the outside or burned out of it from within. I have never gone back to that campsite. None of us have. We retrieved the gear separately, in a large group, in the middle of a bright afternoon, and even then, Mia refused to come. She said she would never go back to that part of the mountains. We still don't have an explanation for the scratches on Carlos's arm, or what Mia saw behind me, or what my boyfriend heard that night that he has never fully described to me. The bracelet sits in a drawer in my house. I've never put it on. I've never thrown it away either. I'm not sure I'm supposed to. What do you think that woman knew when she pressed it into my hand? And why did she choose me? Deeper into the darkness we go, and the next story reminds us that evil doesn't always make a sound. Story 3. The Cigarette in the Dark. My grandparents were Dutch, immigrants to New Zealand, practical people, not the sort to tell ghost stories or entertain foolishness. My grandfather was a butcher by trade, a man who dealt with the reality of mortality every working day, and was not easily rattled by the physical world. I want you to hold on to that, because the night I'm about to describe frightened him more than anything in his 68 years of life, and he told me so himself plainly, without dramatization. He said, "I have never been that scared. Not before, not since." It was the 1970s, New Zealand's North Island. My grandparents loaded their 4 children, my mother and her siblings, none of them older than 10, into their caravan and drove out into the rural wilderness near a lake in the rainforest. The kind of wilderness that New Zealand does quietly and completely. Vast, green, ancient, genuinely remote, in a way that parts of the world no longer manage to be. They were far from anything. No other campers, no nearby town. Just the lake, the trees, and the sound of the forest. The children went to bed early. My grandparents stayed up a little while longer, reading, having tea, the comfortable quiet of 2 people who have been married long enough to sit in easy silence. It was a good night, a normal night, the kind of night that lulls you into the belief that everything is fine. Then my grandmother touched my grandfather's arm. She'd heard something. Footsteps outside the caravan. The specific sound of a twig snapping underfoot. Deliberate, weighted, human. And then maybe a voice. Low, half-heard. The kind of sound that makes you hold your breath and tell yourself you imagined it. My grandfather told her it was nothing. He believed it, mostly. But he didn't sleep. He lay in the dark of that caravan, his wife beside him, his 4 small children breathing quietly in the back. And he listened. The forest had settled into the deep silence of very late night. No animals, no wind, just the occasional creak of the caravan frame cooling in the dark. And then one footstep, right outside the door. A single footstep so close that he could hear the compression of earth beneath whoever made it. Right there, right on the other side of the thin metal door. He went to the window. He pressed his face to the glass and looked out into the dark. There was no moon that night. The darkness outside was total. The kind of dark that rural wilderness makes. The kind that city people never truly experience, where you cannot see your own hand at arm's length. There was nothing to see, except a glowing point of orange light. A cigarette, burning slowly in the dark, at a height that suggested a very tall man, standing completely still, directly in front of the caravan door. My grandfather stood at the window and looked at this glowing point of light, and understood, with the full weight of a man who was not frightened easily, that he was in serious danger, not because of what he could see, because of what he could hear, because even though whoever held that cigarette was standing perfectly, completely still, he could still hear other footsteps, moving through the dark, circling, more than one person, maybe more than 2. He had a butcher's knife. He'd brought it on the trip for reasons he now doesn't remember. Habit, probably, the way tradespeople carry their tools as a matter of reflex. It was in the drawer of the small kitchen unit. He thought about his wife. He thought about his 4 children sleeping in the back of the caravan. He thought about the fact that he was in the middle of nowhere, no telephone, no nearby help, no option except whatever he decided to do in the next 30 seconds. He got the knife. He opened the door. Nothing. Silence. Empty darkness. No footsteps, no movement, no rustle in the undergrowth where someone stepping back quickly would have disturbed the leaves. The sounds stopped the instant the door opened, as completely and immediately as if a recording had been switched off. He looked down. The cigarette butt was on the ground directly in front of the door. Still warm, freshly finished, just dropped. He did not go back inside and try to sleep. He did not wait for morning. He woke his wife quietly, told her they were leaving, and they loaded the children into the car still in their pajamas and drove away from that lake and those trees and that absolute suffocating dark without stopping until they reached the lights of the nearest town. He never went back. He never found out who those men were or what they wanted or how many of them there were standing in the dark, outside the door where his children were sleeping. He had theories. The rural North Island in the 1970s had its dangers, its isolated roads, and its violent possibilities. But he never found out, and I think, in some ways, that's the worst part of this story. He drove away and survived, and never learned what he had escaped. The cigarette butt was still there, still warm, which means whoever dropped it had been standing at that door, in that darkness, for long enough to smoke an entire cigarette, in silence, watching, waiting, and then vanished without a sound the moment the door opened. They were ready for him to open it. They were expecting him to open it. What do you think was on the other side of that darkness? And what do you think would have happened if my great-grandfather had been a heavier sleeper? Thank you for watching. Sleep well tonight. And if you hear something through your walls, through your tent, through the thin dark outside your door, maybe just this once, don't dismiss it. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment telling us which story haunted you most. The next video is already waiting for you. Sleep well, or try.